Good afternoon, and welcome to AIADA's AutoTalk. I'm your host, Rachel Soleimani. Before I introduce today's presenter, a few quick reminders. Everyone that is registered for today's program will receive a copy by early next week. And if you have any questions, feel free to enter them into the lower right side of your interface under the Q&A bar. Now join me in welcoming Laramie Stanquist. Laramie is a special accounts risk consultant for Federated Insurance, one of our oldest and dearest affinity partners. So I am just going to hand it right over to him. Laramie, take it away.
All right, thank you, Rachel, and thank you AIADA for the partnership over these years, and Dan Barson for being a great support mechanism for us, and then all the dealers that work with the association, also with Federated. We definitely appreciate all the partnerships. So today we're going to talk a little bit about auto fraud and some of the schemes we're seeing, and some of the things that may be a little obscure from what we've talked about in the past. Auto fraud is nothing new in the industry, as all of you know. It's been prevalent for years, but with technology today and some of the sophisticated schemes that are going on today, I just want to point out some things today that maybe you hadn't heard of in the past, or some things that we haven't even brought up to you in the past based off of what's going on. So we just want to provide some tools and best practices to help reduce your auto fraud schemes, and just really serve as reminders to your frontline employees, whether that be sales folks, whether that be F&I folks, whether that be anyone who's in this process. Service folks and car runners and porters and things like that are also involved here along the way. So we'll talk through some of those as we go, but we're going to talk about these different themes, these schemes, how they happen, whether they're preventable or not, and some things that we can do to help reduce that risk. And I'll just throw a spoiler alert out there from the start that are they all preventable? Yes, but probably not. There are definitely some very, very sophisticated rings that go on out there that even with the best practices and the most eagle eye things that you're looking at, you're still going to have some things potentially happen. But for the most part, a lot of these things that we'll talk about today will prevent the majority of the instances from happening out there. And let's be honest, anytime we put controls in place, there's always someone a little bit more sophisticated that's finding some new way, new age technology or new way of making a sinister deal happen out there. So we're not going to be able to prevent each and every one of them, but we should be able to harden the target a little bit as we go through. So three main areas of fraud we're going to talk about is just garage keeper theft losses. So these are vehicles that are coming in for service, vehicles that are coming in for other reasons, basically through the shop area. Then we got our false pretense and the kind of these theft trick and device type schemes, and then the traditional theft claims. Those are still alive and prevalent out there today as well, and we'll talk through some of those. So we'll talk about how risk management's important, why we should be taking this seriously as we go through it. But as we look at some of the garage keeper theft losses, the first thing I'll point out on this is you really have to know your policy. If you're with Federated, you really want to look at how your garage keeper's coverage is programmed, whether you're paying primary on this stuff, whether you're paying just legal liability or some other way of your insurance, how that would pick up. So that's one that I'll always point out at the beginning of some of these areas is you really want to know your coverage. You really want to know what you want to pay for, what you don't want to pay for, and talk that over with your rep as you're talking through your insurance coverage on an annual basis. But as we look at this, it says don't let your customers leave valuables in their vehicles. So we've seen an uptick of customers coming in, dropping their vehicle off for service or some other transaction, maybe it's body shop or something like that, and claiming that they have left something in the vehicle of value. Maybe that's a diamond ring, maybe that's a family heirloom, maybe that's golf clubs in the trunk, whatever it happens to be. And then when they come back to pick it up, all of a sudden, whatever was supposedly in that vehicle is now gone. And so something you don't necessarily think about, or people didn't necessarily think about in the past, but is, when folks are dropping their vehicles off for service, what kind of check are you doing of the vehicle at that time? And I know we usually have service writers that are right there on site as a customer pulls their vehicle in to take down customer information, make sure that we're servicing it the right way, getting all the specifications, whatever it happens to be. But is there a process in place as that goes on to say, what's in the vehicle? Do you have any valuables in the vehicle? Is there a checklist or something that the customer signs off? on while they're dropping that vehicle off. And is that the service writer just doing a visual check of that vehicle? It doesn't have to be an intrusive check, but maybe it's something where they open up the door, have the customer open the door and say, okay, are you leaving anything of value in here? Let's make sure you got your cell phone. Let's make sure you can start it off by talking about things that they're going to need. They're going to need their cell phone. They're going to need a wallet, things like that. But then really getting into, okay, is there anything else of personal value in here that you're keeping? Anything in the trunk? And maybe have that, if it is a trunk, obviously you got SUVs that maybe don't have a trunk. But having that customer just do a double check. And it can really be more of a customer service type thing than an intrusive thing. Because we've had that happen. Uh, and then you have some schemes that are going on out there where, as you see on the screen here, customer pulls into the service drive, leaving the keys in the car stolen within minutes, and the best guess is the thief had surveilled the location. But then the customer claims that there's an extensive amount of personal items that were left in the vehicle. And maybe we didn't even have a chance at that point to check out that vehicle. And so the customer and the thief could be working in conjunction together, looking for a quick getaway of, $10,000, $20,000, whatever it happens to be, whatever your policy limit may be for certain losses like that, to get a quick dollar. It's almost like the new slip and fall scheme that goes on. We kind of joke in the insurance industry that slips and falls can be a pretty easy claim for a fraudster to get. And this is another area that's getting manipulated from a potential theft standpoint that some of our dealers just maybe haven't looked at as closely as they could in the process. So one of our dealers has a sign off like this. The service writers physically have the customer sign off that basically says, the dealer's not responsible for anything left in the vehicle, and basically putting the onus back on that customer. So now whether that sign off actually holds water in the end from a claims perspective, that obviously depends on your state and things like that. But the bigger thing is what it does is it reminds the customer, it gives the customer some thought in the back of their mind that, hey, if I leave anything of value in here, I'm going to be on the hook for this. So it puts that onus right back on that customer at that point. So that's ultimately what you're trying to do. Again, we've had some dealers come back and say, well, in our state, we would still have to pay for that. And yes, that may be the case. I can't speak to every state law and things like that. But but at least it puts that onus back in the customer's mind to say, we could potentially be responsible for this. So how do we manage this side of it? Have the service writers ask them to remove any items, including getting in the trunk. These are pretty things we've already hit. You just look inside the vehicle, make sure there's no personal items in there itself. Consider including this waiver of liability, as I talked about in the service authorization form, that says you're not responsible for the theft itself, and then have the customer acknowledge it and sign off that they haven't left any personal items in the vehicle. And then, in the end, make sure that we're just hanging up or not getting hung up on some of these other traditional theft areas, taking those vehicles out, or taking those key fobs and things out of the vehicle. I know it's pretty easy, nowadays with the key fob that you don't even get the key from the customer. They come in, they drop the vehicle off, they walk out with their cell phone and their wallet and whatever personal items. They just leave the car running, key fob in there, and then it may or may not be protected at that point, depending on how many cars are lined up. Obviously there's busier times of the day where you might get a line of different cars sitting out there, and those, obviously if you're having that, the thieves know it too. A lot of times, these thefts aren't just happening randomly. You're getting surveilled pretty far in advance, that folks know when your busy time is, when vehicles are just sitting out there idling with potentially keys sitting inside where they can do a quick type of getaway type thing. So that's another thing. Just make sure when a customer drops that car off, they're dropping off that key fob with the service writer or whoever's taking them in at that point, not leaving that thing in the vehicle with the vehicle running. When it's taken or broken into, they can allege dealer negligence, and obviously that's where you get involved from that perspective. So that's one of the areas. This garage keeper thing. We've always talked about having vehicles fenced in and where are they stored after hours and things like that. But now we're seeing this, like I said, this small uptick in stuff that's just going on that's just kind of weird and kind of random from that perspective as far as people dropping off vehicles in our service areas. So So that's one that focused on from a garage keeper standpoint. Some other ones, these false pretense and then trick and device type schemes. These are some interesting ones, and I'll hit it from a bunch of different angles. I know we had a question out there that says, when are you supposed to identify customers, or when are you supposed to really get information about the customers and to positively ID someone? And I will answer that question by saying, at all times. And what I mean by that is, as a customer comes in and introduces themselves to the salesperson or whomever, that would be a good time if you're going to go out on a test drive. Obviously, you're going to want to get a driver's license at that point, just verifying information. A very simple check as a customer comes in to drive a vehicle or to test drive is to look at the driver's license. Number one, make sure it's valid. Number two, make sure the pictures match. Number three, make sure the age makes sense. If the person on the ID is supposedly 62 years old and this person looks like they're in their early 30s, you probably have some kind of issue there. But I'm probably not investigating any deeper than that at the initial test drive standpoint. But you do want to at least be looking for red flags right away when you're test driving that vehicle. And obviously the biggest red flag is if they come in and they don't have a driver's license. So first and foremost, be asking for a driver's license if they're going to come in and purchase a vehicle or at least test drive a vehicle. Some other things we're seeing out there from a credit standpoint is, this one says do not manually enter credit card numbers. So I know there's transactions now that are going on over the internet or going on over the phone and things like that. The credit card companies know that this is a bigger area of theft or a bigger area of fraud when you're manually entering credit card numbers, because you don't have to physically swipe or physically insert the chip into your reader. They can tell you whatever number they want, and there's the bigger chance of potentially having issues that credit card is not valid for the valid person using it. So that's one area. If you are doing transactions over the phone or remotely, entering those credit card numbers over the phone is an increase potential for some trick and device things. Other things is if you're running a credit card on site and it's kicking it back saying it's not valid or some other issue with the credit card. I know some people will run it 2 times or 3 times, and then once they get to the third time they get kicked back, they'll call the credit card company and find out what's going on, or the customer will say, hey, there's nothing wrong with that card, call them up and find out what's going on. Well, some of these these credit card schemes, the number on the back of the card is not a valid number. Well, it is a valid number. It's going to a boiler room where someone from a fraudster's side is picking up the phone and verifying that it's a valid card, even though it's really not. So what we tell folks is don't use the number on the back of the card. Use a phone number from an online search instead. So if they're coming in with some Visa card from a major bank, look on the major bank's website and make sure that the number that you're seeing on the back of the card matches up to the number on the website itself. So that's another just a check and balance, so that you're not relying specifically on that card itself to verify if it's a valid card or not, because these, like it says here, they've been fabricated with false identification and ID theft type things in the past, and they will provide a fabricated authorization if used that way. Some other things to think about is a question asked about when do you verify the information. Well, don't speed through the credit and identification process. Here is one where, if there are red flags, you're going to see it here. Obviously at the beginning, you're verifying that it matches up with their ID, that the picture and the age and things like that are appropriate. But once you're doing through the credit process, this is where you can really start getting in depth and saying, okay, what is the address of that person on the ID? What is the address of the information on the credit report? What is the credit report saying about previous places lived, and what is this person saying about their information, and really does the customer understand or know what their history is, and just verifying that if there are red flags to the process, that we're just identifying them. And I'm not going to say that every red flag is a cause for concern, but you guys will know internally, some red flags are bigger than others. And so there's some other things that are out there, Social Security numbers being unissued numbers or numbers matching another person's identity. So there's been some Social Security number fraud that's gone on, specifically over the last 5 or 10 years or so, because they've changed the numbers on the Social Security cards now, that they're a random sampling pool of Social Security numbers now versus the way they were done in the past. So you want to look at those. There's been an increase in other undocumented individuals, identities stolen from folks that are coming over from either Puerto Rico or Dominican Republic. Those are areas where we've seen some increase in stolen identities, specifically over the last 3 or 4 years, because there's been so much aid going to those countries because of different disasters and hurricanes and things like that, that they're seeing an uptick in, increased Social Security numbers being distributed and then obviously being stolen and things like that. A traditional piece here is, just the typical starter check. You can see that here. Anytime you're getting a check from the first check in the book or whatever, that's always a potential red flag, meaning that this is a brand new bank account potentially, or this is a brand new, customer overall. That's always a red flag when you're seeing it as a starter check. Better practice, obviously, to get a cashier's check, but there too, you want to be able to call to verify funds are even available there, because we've seen some issues with cashier's checks over the years as well. But the bigger thing is this next slide where it talks about they just want to make sure that the driver's license, the name, the number, the address, date of birth match, and compare that to the identification on the credit reports and verify that all this information is there and provided. Most of the times when we're looking at these deal jackets and we're looking at, going back and reinvestigating them, there are 1 or 2 or 3 different red flags that were either glossed over or just not identified in the process. And I'll give you an example here. Here's the ID for an individual who came in. And as you see from the picture, does this person look 63 years old? Because the ID was of this person, which they had a copy of, as you can tell. We're not showing you all the information here. But when they ran the credit report, the red flag summary here, you will note that the date of birth over there on the left-hand side says 1954. So just a very simple piece there saying, does that even match up? And then you've got some other, potential red flags if you're running a report like this. I think this is a vendor that's out there. You guys probably know better than I do on the different vendors that you use for checking red flags in your system. But it does give you some alerts that talk about things there. So that third alert there says current address conflict, inquiry age younger than Social Security number issue date, Social Security issue date prior to input year of birth. So just something like that. It's obviously it comes back as clear. I don't know how that whole vendor thing works, but that's something that you should look at and at least get a little bit more information. Now there might be a very reasonable and good explanation for it, but if these things are coming up in the process, these are definitely red flags that I wouldn't complete a deal until we can get it all sorted out and make sure that everything is correct. A lot of different ways that folks are getting training. I know a lot of the financial companies are giving training. A lot of the credit processing companies are giving training. I know the local law enforcement in various jurisdictions are giving training on, how to identify these schemes and devices. All across the country, you all are going to see different types of things that you run into. So partnering with this local law enforcement and the Secret Service is one that looks into a lot of this identity theft. And a lot of times those folks do have outreach programs where they will get out to various individual businesses or even association events and discuss some of the things that are going on, either locally or in that area of the country. And so that's another area to continually keep people up to date on. Because, like I said, the moment we stay on top of this stuff or get on top of this stuff, there's some other deal that these fraudsters are coming up with that we're going to have to get back on top of. So that continuous training and keeping folks in the loop are so important. Pay careful attention to out-of-state buyers and brokers purchasing stock vehicles. We've seen that over the years where, especially with the internet today, people can buy vehicles from anywhere across the country and come grab it from your dealership. And that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you've got a standard, I don't know, Chevy Impala base model LT model with no bells and whistles on it, and you're located in the state of California, and this person wants to fly there from Georgia just to pick up this standard vehicle, it's kind of like, well, why would they do that? Either you got the best deal in the country, which you probably want to look at your transaction prices at that point anyway, or there's something going on with that. So I think you're all aware of that, but these out-of-state buyers purchasing, less than spectacular vehicles off your lot, those are probably areas to be investigating a little further. And purchasing vehicles with no special add-ons is reason for concern in many cases. So these, again, getting to that stock vehicle, why are they going after a certain make, model, brand of vehicle? That should be in question. So I know earlier in the year we saw an uptick in Chevy Camaros for some reason. Were very hot vehicles to get rid of. We haven't really gotten to the bottom of the why. Obviously, it has some kind of value, whether that be from a part perspective or they're able to get rid of those vehicles a lot quicker on the black market or whatever. But if you know of those things or you're hearing of those things, obviously you want to pay special attention to those particular types of vehicles that are going on. So here's some other things. Internet customer buys a used car on a credit card. Dealer runs the card 4 times, $5,000 each for a $20,000 total transaction. Receives verbal approval, ships the car. So basically you're drop shipping this car. But turns out that all they were getting was approval that the card was valid, but not that there was actual, the money was going to be there, the balance was going to be there and able to pay. So basically this was releasing the vehicle before finalizing the deal when it was all said and done. So anytime a credit card company, just because they run the credit card and it approves doesn't mean that those funds are going to transfer, because they could still back out of that and potentially have some issues on the back end of that. So you just want to be wary of anything credit card related, making sure that that deal is finalized before releasing that vehicle itself. And I guess that goes to any type of releasing of the vehicle, these drop shipments and things like that of vehicles. You want to be very careful anytime you're letting a vehicle go before any of the financing is finalized, because those are areas that there are obviously increased potential for thefts along that way. And then anytime you work with brokers, there's a lot of good brokers out there, but you also just want to keep up on who the brokers are and what they may be getting into, because we've seen that as well. Is that there have been some brokers who get into some situations where they're maybe not on the up and up anymore, and they're not doing what's in your best interest or what's in their best interest, and just making sure that you're keeping up on those relationships. And I know it kind of goes back to the whole smell test. If it doesn't smell good, you want to do a little bit more investigating and make sure that it's still on the up and up. And like I said, a lot of these deals, it's when we go back, it's a lot easier as an insurance company to be the Monday morning quarterback. I get that. But a lot of times when we look back on these things, there are at least a couple red flags, if not several red flags, in these transactions to be able to point to from that perspective. And there's no doubt, in this market, you definitely want to sell vehicles. We're not making as much on the vehicle transaction, so we're also, increasing our financing activities and our F&I offerings and things like that. And sometimes, some of these checks and balances might get glossed over a little bit, or some of these red flags may not be investigated as thoroughly as we'd want them to be. And so you just want to really look at that and do that continuous training with those F&I folks and make sure that their priorities line up with what your priorities are at that point, and make sure everyone's on the same page from a theft and fraud standpoint. And then we get into the traditional theft claims that have always been out there, because I don't want to bypass some of these traditional things, because currently when a theft is taking place, over 50% of the time when a theft takes place, the keys are in the vehicle, or the thief has the key. They were able to obtain the key somehow. So whether that be in the vehicle or they were able to get access to the key through your dealership. So definitely be diligent in key control. I know a lot of folks have got very, very sophisticated key control systems in place, but you want to keep up on that. And make sure that you're not the target for some of these folks. So, and I think I said this early on is that these thieves aren't they're not amateurs a lot of times. A lot of times they've done their homework. They know the dealers they're going after. They know the reason they're going after that dealer, whether it be because they know in the service department they're not doing the checks and balances, whether they know on the sales side they're not doing the checks and balances from a theft standpoint. So it's all of those things you want to be looking at because these thieves are going after they're going after the lowest fruit in the tree, and you definitely don't want to be the low hanging fruit when it comes to vehicle theft and security. So here it says internal key controls are important. Service departments shouldn't leave keys in vehicles, even those in the service bay. I know we're up here. I'm up here in the northern area of the country, and we see this almost every year with clockwork that customers don't want their vehicles to be cold, or we don't want their vehicles to be cold after they come back from service, or maybe they went to give them a car wash or something like that, and the lot runner parks the vehicle out front waiting for the customer to finalize all the paperwork and get the receipts or whatever it happens to be, and all of a sudden customer comes out and the vehicle's gone because the keys were just left inside. Vehicle's running to try to keep it warm for the customer, thinking we're doing all the right things from a customer service standpoint, and all of a sudden someone's been casing our dealership for a week, a month, a year, whatever it happens to be, and they know what that practice is, and all of a sudden the vehicle's gone. And so things like that, you just can't let your proverbial foot off the gas when it comes to these security measures, because the moment you do will be the time that something happens. Where do you store that second set of keys? That's been another area that we've seen now. Obviously, folks do a very good job of keeping that first set of keys secured, but are you keeping all of the second set of keys in the same area? Is it in a locked file cabinet, or is it somewhere else in a safe or whatever? So that all these second set of keys aren't in the exact same area in case someone is able to break into our office and get into a certain area. I think that bottom bullet there is thieves are watching. I don't think there can be a day that goes by as a dealership that you can't be thinking about whether someone's casing your business and whether you're going to be the next target. So you never want to be that low-hanging fruit. Here are a couple pictures from our files, and I'll just let you take a look for a second, and I'll kind of explain them here. But the one on the left-hand side is actually a break room. You can see there's some drinks on the table in there, and you can see where the keys are stored, which is right inside the front door of the dealership. So obviously no one's there in the break room at the time of this picture being taken, and all the keys are sitting right there in the open for someone to come in and potentially walk away with something. The other one on the right-hand side is a dealership that had lock boxes on their windows, and they were taking the extra step of removing the keys from the lock boxes at the end of the day, and their process was to have an individual go out in this golf cart and take all the keys out of the lock boxes, and then they'd put them on this keyboard, and then they would park this golf cart in the service bay at the end of the day. So at the end of the day, all the keys were sitting inside the service bay, waiting for someone to break in and walk off with them. So at that point, we kindly explained to them that, yes, we don't necessarily think lock boxes are the best option, but I think lock boxes are a better option than taking all the keys out and putting them on the back of a keyboard on the back of a golf cart in your service bay. So there again, looking at your practices and trying to realize, am I the low-hanging fruit here or not? And so this one talks about that, the casing of the businesses. The fraudsters will watch your business for weeks or months just to see what your key control practices are. We know this through interviews, and we know this through the claims process, that a lot of these folks are doing similar things at various dealerships in a localized area. And so a lot of times, like I said, it's not amateur hour when these folks are making making these transactions. These folks they know what they're doing, and they know why they're doing it from that perspective. So the bottom line on a lot of this stuff is you always have to be diligent. Everyone has to be looking and investigating this stuff. You want to be looking for internal red flags. You want to be looking for those, your individual employees. Are you having a turnover of specific positions? Maybe it's a detail position, or maybe it's a car runner type position, or a lot running type position. Those positions could be yeah, you want to do your investigation of those folks as well. I know there's sometimes, higher turnover type positions, but you still want to do the investigation. You want to do the background checks on those individuals and make sure that you're not hiring people on that are potential, risks for you from an internal theft perspective. Because some of these transactions, we are finding that there's internal folks involved as well. And a lot of times it's kind of those transitional or transitionary type employees. So keep an eye out for that kind of stuff. And just make sure that you're doing your due diligence. But along the way, obviously, your service department has some things to think about, as we talked about with the theft issues that are going on there. Our sales folks need to be diligent as far as matching up the customer with the ID that they're looking at, and not glossing over the details from that perspective. But the bigger piece is the F&I department really investigating that file and making sure that any red flags that do potentially pop up are addressed along the way. So I think everyone has an active role in this, and those dealerships that do it well know that this is a very big and important thing from their standpoint. That yes, they're all about selling vehicles and servicing vehicles and having transactions, but they also know that having theft awareness built into all these transactions is also at their forefront. So those are some of the things you want to be thinking about as you think about your fraud and your theft from that perspective. So those of you that want additional information on this topic or any of our topics, we definitely have training available. Our Federated Risk Management Academy, we've got 2.5-day seminars and 1-day seminars that we host all across the country. And we put together various plans for individual dealerships. And those of you that are Federated clients, we definitely have folks out there that are there to help you and really make sure that your business is successful and identifying these trends. So at this point, I think I'll turn it back over to Rachel and leave it open for any additional questions. But thank you all for participating, and hopefully we gave you some good ideas to be thinking about from a theft and false pretense perspective.
Laramie, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to speak to us about such an important topic. We really appreciate it. To keep our Auto Talk series going, join us July 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern when our used car guys return. Mike Rossman and Bob Grill will talk about protecting your used car margins. Be on the lookout for promotions on how to register. For more information about AIADA, visit AIADA.org or call 1-800-GO-AIADA. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and have a great day.